2, action.
Good evening. My name is Vinsha Klute. I'm the Executive Director of the Namibia Institute of Corporate Governance. Welcome back to Fireplace Conversations. We're excited to have you tonight again. And I have with me tonight to discuss the improving the governance of public enterprises. I've got Mrs. Louise Shixwameni, who is a decorated academic who holds numerous achievements, and we've spoken about her before, in various fields, PhD studies at Wits University, specializing in strategy and leadership, and which she's still pursuing at the moment, master's degree in administration from UNAM, postgraduate diploma in management consultancy from the UK, advanced diploma in business administration from Kenya, certified business process management expert, certified balanced scorecard expert, and her professional career includes working for various institutions and ministries, and she is currently the Deputy Executive Director at the Ministry of Finance and Public Enterprises since 2017, and what a pleasure to have her to speak about this topic that sits within the purview of her ministry. And then we have Mr. Ntelamo Ntelamo, who is a teacher. He's actually a practicing lawyer and a teacher, and he's an author of 3 books, one of which relates to the governance of public enterprises, a manual on the Public Enterprises Governance Act in Namibia, and we'll be touching a little bit on the Act today. So also very apposite for him to be on our panel today. He is an admitted and practicing legal practitioner, as I've said, practicing in the High Court of Namibia, and he's worked more than 17 years in various public enterprises, serving in a number of capacities, including as a legal advisor and company secretary. He's also served as a board member on public enterprises. He holds the following academic qualifications: basic education teacher's diploma, paralegal diploma, LLB, LLM, corporate law, graduate diploma in labor law, and advanced certificate in business rescue. And he's a candidate LLD, Doctor of Laws, with his research topic on a critical evaluation of non-executive directors' liability for breach and overreach in corporate governance duties in state-owned companies in South Africa. So hopefully that he can bring that context to Namibia. Welcome tonight. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about governance of natural resources in the past and just the governance of state assets generally. And you're probably wondering, what is governance? And so we really want to expand on how we can improve the governance of public enterprises and the state of governance of some public enterprises. And I must say that some of these public enterprises are obviously members of us, and we don't want to brush them under the same comb, but some of them have really been deplorable. The state of governance has been deplorable, judging from the recent reports. And these entities are fraught with many governance issues ranging from relationships, leadership, transparency, systems, processes, and so forth. And in light of this, in the emerging developments, when we're speaking about natural resources and state assets and the discoveries of late, it is critical for the economy of this company that PEs function optimally in their governance and management of these assets. And we really want to dive into this topic, and maybe I'll start with the person who's responsible for these public enterprises. And since we've been discussing this issue, loosely interpreted for me, governance really alludes to management and leadership. However, as the custodian of state assets on behalf of the ultimate owners of these resources, all Namibians, public enterprises should understand what governance actually means. And maybe it's the time to really put that into context. What is the essence of governance? We're just talking governance, and a lot of people are like, what is governance? What are we talking about? Yeah. Ms. Shixwameni.
A very good evening to all the viewers, and Vincia, thank you again for having me. Today we are really discussing a topic that is very close to my heart.
Yeah.
and that is the governance of public enterprises. Yes, public enterprises has been at the center of the Namibian discussion. So you would barely read the newspaper per day and not a topic about public enterprises. Of course, they face a lot of public scrutiny, simply because public enterprises, or what we call state-owned enterprises, they are owned by the state, which means they are owned by the Namibian people. So, and the state is taking care of the public enterprises on behalf of the Namibian people. So the Namibian people have a say on how their own companies are managed. Now, when we talk about governance or corporate governance, a lot of people think, oh, this is a new terminology. It's a new concept. So, basically, governance is when we talk about governance, we are talking about how organizations, institutions, or companies are run.
Yes.
To run an institution of any of its kind, you need to have rules, you need to have processes, you need to have systems in place. So you also need to have policies on how that company is governed. You also need to have a system of holding people accountable. So when we are talking about governance, we are just talking about, if you look at a certain institution, if you look at one of the public enterprises, does it have systems in place? Does it have processes in place? Are those systems and processes transparent? Does it have rules and regulation? Does it have a process of holding people accountable? Is that institution run for sustainability? That is number one, about governance. Then governance is also about how to manage the relationship between, we are calling now them stakeholders, because we usually talk about shareholders, but the governance of institutions are not just about shareholders, but it's about stakeholders, which include the shareholders and different type of stakeholders, whether it's client, customer, suppliers, and anyone that is involved. So is that institution, whether public or private, has a strategy on how to manage the relationship. So if you have, for example, an institution, let's say we just use a shop, and that shop does not have a strategy on how to engage customers. I think in the next, maybe that shop would eventually end up closing. That is the second one. The other issue, when we talk about governance, we are really talking about risk issues on how that institution is managing its risk. And if that company does not manage its risk properly, it would mean that company is not going to be existing. Because, for example, like we had COVID, many of the company died with COVID. You know, so basically, that is what governance is all about. Now, it is important for us to contextualize public enterprises, because in Namibia, of course, the public has a right to criticize every newspaper. They say it seems that a special zoom on public enterprises. But I think it's important to understand that since we started maybe with less than 10 public enterprises at independence, at the moment, we have 81 public enterprises. And this, I'm talking about the 81 that are listed according to the 2006 State-Owned Governance Act and the PEGA 2019. So they are now 81. But there are also other state entities that are not listed, because there's also a confusion between what is a public enterprises and what is a state entity. So, and now when we talk about the 81, I will just talk about since the ministry was created. Okay? So we started with a portfolio of around 50 billion Namibian dollars, the total portfolios, because we now have 22 commercial public enterprises, 45 non-commercial, and we have extra budgetary, which I think about 14 there. But as we're talking today, this portfolio have grown from 40 billion to around 2010 there to about 142 billion in 2023. There has been a constant growth of the portfolio, although, of course, that portfolio is marred with issues of technical insolvency, company that are facing cash flow issues, liquidity issues, solvency issues. But of course, I think there has been a tremendous growth, and things has been improving. A lot still need to be done. So I just wanted to give that context in terms of where we are.
Yeah. And I think it's an important context to have, because we're talking about public enterprises, and it's important that, when we talk about public enterprises, that we understand the background, so that when we're speaking about the issues, and we'll be uncovering a lot of issues as we go, there are specific issues that need to be addressed in the coming sessions on Fireplace conversations, because we really need to uncover those issues, unpack them, and find solutions to them, because we can't keep reading about the same issues over and over again. This is what we're trying to address today. Mr. Ntelamo, give us just a quick overview of what you think that governance looks like. And then I really want us to talk about, in view of these local and global developments that are happening now, and particularly investor considerations. And of course, generally, governance has gained preeminence in conversations. There's a realization of prominence, in governance. And I just want you to speak about what is governance, but why does it even matter? Why should we even be talking about it?
Thank you so much, and thank you to the viewers out there. For those who do a lot of studies on governance, really it is one subject that is difficult to define. Okay. And the more you try to define it, the more you realize it applies to different contexts. So I want to define it in relation to public enterprises.
Yeah.
And for that reason, I would then move away from the definition of the Cadbury control and manage. But I would rather look at it as your ecosystem and architecture in managing public enterprises. So how do we do that? I generally look at public enterprises as being born out of the Constitution. It doesn't matter how many of them existed before independence, okay, but they now find placement in the Constitution. If you look at Article 40, that would speak to some of the duties of cabinet members, and these are especially ministers. There in that provision, you would find something to do with parastatal.
Okay.
How they must be coordinated. And it is that coordination I really want to speak about. Okay. From that point of view, you would realize that many of them, or all of them, are established in one way or another by primary legislation. Right. Okay? And that primary legislation would bring in some organ responsible for the governance of the institution, of that public enterprise. So this is how you bring in a minister as a shareholder representative. And remember, we already spoke about a minister from a constitutional point of view. So here you will have an enabling legislation also talking about who the shareholder minister may be, and then it will talk about a board of directors. These are very important organs in the governance of any entity. So if you want to speak governance properly, especially for public enterprises, I would rather move from a constitutional point of view, okay, as the broader law, the mother law, if you like, into the primary legislation. And then now you have PEGA here, operating as a supervisor, regardless of any other law that may apply, of course. Yes, so now that is what for me defines governance. That whole scope. So you'd have issues of leadership there. You would have issues of the laws, the policies, and everything that fits into the system, so that an institution then realizes why it was created. Because at the end of the day, We create these institutions so that they assist in the developmental agenda of government. Other people ask, is the state in business? We were taught in economics. At secondary level, you'd find one of the largest sources of income of government is tax. But that is not the only source. Government is not prohibited to venture into business, which is why in some instances it forms state-owned companies. And these are companies proper, as she already distinguished the various public enterprises that we have. So you would find these must also go for profit in as much as they can accommodate some social perspectives. But they must earn dividends for the shareholder. And how do we use these dividends? We go into the economy and see whether we must build schools, hospitals, whatever infrastructure that we need to roll out. So if you look at all that, government's perspective in bringing all these public enterprises is really to serve the people. We go back to Article 40A. It ends in the public interest. That is very important. So in a nutshell, that is then my description of what governance is.
And I think if I hear you correctly, my question, the latter part of the question was why governance even matters, is so that it can serve, that public enterprises can serve the best interests of the country or the people. Is that also what you would say, or is there anything else you'd add to that, Ms. Shixwameni?
Yeah. In answering the question why governance matters, I always like to answer that question in the opposite direction.
Okay.
If the failure of governance means that there is no sustainability, means that there is corruption, this means that there are unethical conduct, and it means that those institutions would not be there to serve in the best interest of the people. Now, if public enterprises are created, because like in Namibia where we have a small economy, I think our public enterprises are the main key drivers for economic growth. So we are saying that if the Namibian economy is to transform aggressively, it needs to start with the transformation of public enterprises.
Right.
Now, they are the center of driving economic growth, infrastructure development in the country, poverty reduction in the country, empowerment, entrepreneurship. So, therefore, if governance matters, simply because when you don't have an ethical leadership, you would have what we are getting in the newspapers every day to say, no, this company, the people are overpaying themselves. So if you have like a public entity which the wage bill is 80% of the total revenue, is that company serving itself, or is serving the best interest of the mandate of that company? So governance is at the center of that. Every time that a company is managed, the company must come first. Now, but in the public enterprises landscape, you would find out that at some point, the board of directors and maybe the CEOs, their actions and the decisions are to serve the interest of the few, but not the interest of the organization. Because if you are serving the interest of the organization, you will not have a company, for example, that is having significant losses over a period of 5 years. You don't have financial reports, audited financial report. It would mean that people cannot get bonuses if the company does not make profit.
Yeah.
So therefore, the governance matter, because if we want this institution, and I serve in different institutions, whether it's at a church, whether it's at a school, whether it's in a traditional authority, whether it's in a private or public company, if any leader or any manager in that institution does not apply governance, it would mean that in the next 5 to 6 years, that company will not exist. So that, and if that company, some of these companies, they serve critical services for the nation, the people would suffer. And that's exactly the reason why you see a lot of outcry from the citizen if certain public enterprises are not serving those services. And that's why to us, it's at the utmost important to ensure that those public enterprises are governed in the best interest of the company and in the best interest of the nation.
There are so many issues that you're raising as you're speaking, both of you, because you've raised issues of CSI, you've raised issues of leadership, corruption, ethics, and so many other things that underlie the reason why governance is flawed at the moment and why we're trying to improve governance in public enterprises. And we want to unpack those in different series, of course, different episodes, of course. But just for tonight, I want to focus on the Public Enterprises Governance Act for a moment. He's mentioned, the Establishing Act. You've spoken about the legal framework in essence. You've glossed over it. You spoke about the Constitution, the enabling legislature, and then obviously any other legal framework that applies within a specific public entity. And in this case, the Public Enterprises Governance Act is the overriding or the overarching legislation so far as it concerns the governance of public enterprises. And I'd like to start with Mr. Ntelamo, because you've, in this book that we mentioned today, and I think in an article, in the journal article actually, you criticize aspects of the act that required amendment at the time that you wrote this article in order to enhance applicability of that act. Can you speak to us about some aspects of this?
All right, thank you. Well, there are many. I'm sure I'll be.
Speak without fear.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'll be.
Yes.
All right. I'll focus on a few,
Yes.
which I can remember out of my head. There will be aspects to do with your Section 4, powers and functions. Think of the minister. In as far as directives are concerned, all right? If you analyze legislation, how it's made, from a policy point of view, you might get to a point where you start questioning whether this directive has weight and how much weight can you accord to it, all right? I would have rather liked a lot of these directives that come out of your Section 4 would have found their way as provisions within the law. It's much easier that way. We can mention a number of them. Look at the specter of suspending executives in public enterprises. There is a directive, I'm not sure whether it is still in circulation, where you would have to get some blessing before you occasion the suspension. So you have a lot of issues coming in as to who is employing who. Who's supervising who to know the misdemeanor, the offenses, the transgressions that an executive may have breached in the workplace. And there are policies also in these workplaces, all right? So who would be best suited? That is one question. Number two, the consistency thereof. If this public entity applies for the consent and it's given, maybe another applies and it's not given, or in some cases, other public entities don't even go there to seek for the blessing to suspend. They simply go ahead. What are the repercussions where that is ignored? Okay, so that is your Section 4. Let's look at the appointment of directors. So you have a trade-off in the PEGA. It recognizes what an enabling law may provide. I don't think that is really much of the problem I have. There is so much scope, allow the minister to look at the recommendations the designated staff members may have made of who to appoint. There's a recommendation that must be made. And PEGA clarifies in terms of your non-commercial and your commercial. The issue I have there is where the minister is granted authority to disregard the recommendation and explain to cabinet. But the designated staff members may have run a rigorous process. I don't see it in the law when the minister doesn't go with the recommendation, what process he is going to follow to substitute a few names that may have fallen from the recommended ones. So I tend to get hazy about that space. The other critical point for me, we're discussing governance here. The appointment of a chairperson.
Okay.
That is a thorny issue for me. Here is why. Chairperson is not some ordinary board member on a board. He carries huge responsibilities to lead the board, not just chairing meetings, but to lead the board, to set a philosophy, a certain tone, if you like, and even to try and guide management how they should steer the ship of the institution. So what I would have liked, and my experience really with prejudices, is that it's not very transparent how the appointment of a chairperson happens. There must be some additional requirements to test whether this person can handle that position of leading a board. We don't want to see that the chairperson knows the appointing authority. No, that is not a requirement. We are talking here of merit in terms of competence to contribute to guiding the vision of the institution, of course, the mandate of the institution. So if you compromise already at that level, you have a problem, all right? There's something I want to talk about a little bit before I go on the section 11, 12, and 17. In 1932, a lawyer and an economist wrote a book called The Modern Corporation and Private Property. This is Adolph Belle and Gardner Means in the United States of America. And this is really your modernization, if you like, primarily from that point of view of corporate governance. These two gentlemen feared what you call today the agency problem. They were writing from a perspective of a normal company, privately held. So as you add more and more shareholders, so shareholding becomes dissipated. You have so many people having a stake in this company, so you are now forced to have a team of managers. All right? Now, to join her point, in whose interest would they run it? These two gentlemen said, no, man, these executive managers really come here for their own interest. They don't run it in the interest of the entity and something for the shareholders. That is still a problem in public enterprises. It can be in minus, people take their salaries home. In fact, let me take you to Capitec Bank. There's a man there called Jan Mouton. Maybe the owner, the majority shareholder, I'm not so sure of those facts, but I know he has presence in the company. One day he made a statement. He said, no, independent directors for what? They are independent. They come to your board. They drink your coffee and teas and eat cookies, then they go home. They never spend sleepless nights. Why? Because they are disinterested. That is still part of your agency problem, which she described. So I can run it down. After 5 years, I'm out. I don't care whether it bleeds. But how do we solve that? Now bring in the space of accountability. That is where I think the PEGA has some improvement to be made to it. But before we get there, let's look at the performance agreements that we have. I think my challenge with these, I think the idea is good, but I don't see the enforcement when directors don't perform in terms of, these are binding contracts. Surely there must be consequences. We don't see consequences flowing. How many boards are fired in this country for failing to run these public enterprises? we go to section 17 where we look at executive management staff members of these public enterprises. I think there's a provision there for dismissal when they fail to perform. So we need to look at all these issues and see how, in its current form, we can enforce some of the provisions that are there. And if we do so, we will indeed improve corporate governance in public enterprises.
I like it because, again, so many issues that you've raised that we should probably unpack later on. All these issues have been raised, and I think in the latter time, after you've written your article and the book, there has been some initiative to revamp the Act. And perhaps because you said, evoked some thought into that, and also perhaps because we have seen that despite the Act being there are certain aspects that needed improvement. And I think that process had started at some point, and I remember the regulations that had to be effected for that to come into place, or for the amendment of the Act through regulations. How is this process going? What is going on? Are we addressing some of these issues that have been raised tonight? Ms. Shixwameni?
I used to think that providing oversight is an easy thing, So I go home many nights without solutions to these companies. I mean, running organizations it's very complex,
right?
And like he just described, and when you have more stakeholders, because the minister has a stake in the company because it's Article 40 that says that he must provide oversight. You got the stakeholders now. You have the shareholders. I mean, then you have the customers. Then you have the staff and the management, and you have the public. Now you have to balance those interests. It's very complex. People think it's just easy to run a public entity. It's a very complex animal. But now, I think what we need to acknowledge, and of course I appreciate Mr. Ntelamo's analysis of PEGA, and we would like to have more of those, because when you have a law or a policy or a document, and if it's a public document, it must be up for public scrutiny. Yeah. And we can only improve and become better if we can get those type of scrutiny and constructive criticism. We welcome all those ideas. But PEGA, we have the first law, which was the 2006 State-Owned Governance Act. And when we did the 2006 Act, we moved into what we call a dual governance system, where you have a line ministry and the parastatals or state-owned enterprises that are under there. That line minister is responsible for everything about that public enterprise. Then we have the State-Owned Governance Council, which was providing oversight in terms of governance oversight. Now, this system was having problems, and it has problems all over the world. So I was doing a research recently where actually there are around 100, there are about 72 countries in the world that has moved from a dual governance system to a kind of a hybrid system to a centralized system of governance. Now, so when we looked at the dual governance system and said it is difficult to have 81 companies and each minister is deciding on what to do. Maybe let's take some of the companies and let's centralize them under one minister, especially those that bring a little bit of money into the state that are supposed to. Because we have commercial entities where they're supposed to be profitable, but of course they've become a burden to the state. So we brought in what we call a hybrid governance policy, which was in 2006. Now the hybrid governance policy introduces a kind of a governance process where you have the Minister of Public Enterprises, now the Minister of Finance and Public Enterprises, becoming the shareholder of all commercial entities, while the non-commercial enterprises are also classified and put under their own sector minister. But in terms of board appointment, you are centralized because you want to improve governance, because you always legislate where there are challenges. One of the challenges is that when the recruitment of boards were left to the line ministers, the issues of how those boards are selected, what is the process involved into the recruitment process of board was vague. So now we have set up what we call a board recruitment guideline. And all boards are now recruited in line with that policy. Now you have also Section 8 of PEGA that talks to how board of non-commercials should be recruited and appointed. You have Section 9, which talks about how board of commercial public enterprises must be recruited. Now there in those two sections, 8 and 9, you have now the law prescribe that every person who must qualify for a board, there must be a committee that look at, are these people having, first of all, what is this company mandate for? And do we have the necessary, what kind of skill do we need to get into this board? They say they must meet the required skills, competencies, experience. And when we appoint a board, we should say this company, this is the type of skills that are required, and this is the type of competencies that are required, and the board should be recruited to fit those skills and experience for them to able to manage that company, which was lacking in before. Okay. Now he talks about Section 4. Yeah, Section 4 of course talks about directives and common policy of good governance. Now PEGA is really one of our first law that is aimed at reforming public enterprises. I cannot expect a law like that to be perfect, and I've not seen a law that is perfect. You know, it's good progress, but there's still a lot to be done. But I think to provide us an instrument where now we can hold people accountable. For example, Section 11 talks to issues around governance agreement. You know, previously, like he said, which I agree with him, and I agree with most of the things that he said, there was no penalties, or there was no any type of sanction if a board does not sign a performance agreement. Now, PEGA provides for that if a board failed to sign a governance agreement in line with Section 11 and Section 12, which talks about performance agreement, the board can be removed if they failed. And we have, I just don't want to give example, but I know we have removed boards. And we are now using Section 11 and 12. If a board fails to have not to have governance agreement, performance agreement, we have a good reason to remove that board. If the boards fail to have an integrated strategic business plan, which is Section 13, we looked at ourselves and says most of the company, you'll be surprised, they did not even have proper business plan that are profitable. So they did not even have a business model, since a business model maybe was done in the 90s. So some companies even moved out of their mandate. So we have now brought in a section where it says you need to have an integrated strategic business plan. We want to understand the business model, and we will not approve a business model if that business model is not leading that company to profitability. So we have actually referred back a lot of the integrated strategic business plan until the board and management can find a business model that can work. So, but now with PEGA now has also a provision where people can be fined. You know, the corporate governance is about, one of the things is about the role of the board. Now, boards are there to be held accountable collectively and individually. And it's on that basis now we are saying that if the board members do not act in the best interest of the organization, and they don't provide due care and diligence in terms of their fiduciary duties, we can hold board accountable individually or collectively. And there is a fine now that is prescribed. Then we have now Section 38, which talks now to the regulation. So we have looked now at Section 38, and the list of regulations that are provided for is what we have drafted now. So in terms of what he was talking about, say, for example, if a board member, if, for example, the company failed to provide financial statement, maybe for a period of 2 years or 1 year, what are the penalties? What are the consequences? Yeah, and
hopefully not 2 years.
I mean, you have 12 months, you know, and you have 5 months after for you to submit, Thereafter the 5 months, there should be consequences.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So you have 12 months and then the 5 months to submit.
Yeah.
So within that,
Soon after
that,
the expiry
there
of
should
the
be
5 months.
consequences to say, you have failed. Board, we are reminding you, if the financial statements are not produced, then we must take account. We should hold the board accountable. So we have actually put a lot of because the law cannot provide for everything. You need to have the regulation, and the regulation now are in place. We have consulted widely within the public enterprises and the public on the regulations. So and we think the regulation, of course, they are not going to be the panacea for all the problem, but I think we have strengthened the enforcement of what is being provided in the law. But I can assure you, you can have a good law. Of course, the applicability and the compliance would always be a challenge. Now, number one, we need to have a nation that is ethical. Now, at the same time, the public enterprises are complaining that we are over-regulating because we are passing laws, we are passing directive after directive. It's like people don't want to use common sense. They want to be governed with every little thing. First of all, we believe that people must be ethical. And you don't need everything to be on paper, So if we are not going to improve on ethics and integrity and have an ethical culture within public enterprises, where people just know, if I'm doing this, if I'm recruiting somebody and I'm not recruiting that person in accordance with our recruitment policy, if I'm providing myself bonuses without the company being profitable, that is unethical behavior. Yeah. And we also then to hold each other accountable. There are people that are working in those companies where they see corruption is taking place. Namibians are quiet, until that thing maybe happened to be in the newspaper. Yeah. So we can have good laws, but if we do not build a culture of ethics in this country, we will continue to fail, because in private sector, for example, people just know that you don't even need to be told that this is what you need to do. You just know that if you don't do it, you will face the consequences. So I think one of the things that we are trying to improve is to say, how do we come up with a strategy for consequence management? Like maybe, for example, we're discussing it with my team even 2 days ago, to say, let's assume that a public entity is receiving subsidy and it does not submit its financial statement, then we should withhold the subsidy. Yeah. So we are now putting measures in place and triggers, on how to hold board and executive management. If the board has a compliance, because we have developed like a compliance scorecard of 12 requirements that need to be met. If the board has less than 80% of compliance, then already it's automatic that board cannot be renewed. So if the CEO and management has not met 100% compliance, then we don't need to discuss a renewal of that CEO. It should already be automatic dismissal of that CEO, because those are the things that probably they were missing. And because there was leniency on consequence management, this board can come in, mess up, another board can come in and says, no, because the other board mess up, so there's nothing we can do. They mess up and there is no consequences. Now, people can be followed after, even if you left that company. So, and we are busy setting up an enforcement unit as part of our restructuring of the department, so to ensure that there's a dedicated section on compliance and enforcement of PEGA.
So yes, and that was going to be my next question. I actually, first of all, wanted to say that I'm hearing you say that the issues that have been raised obviously are only a few issues in terms of, the shortfalls of PEGA. And these are being addressed by the regulations. The regulations are underway and the process of consultation is finished. So we are looking forward to having the regulations enforced or promulgated very soon.
Very soon.
Okay.
Very soon. And maybe just to add on one of the issues that he touched, we also agree that PEGA's had some gaps there, like in this process where you are like now saying, okay, if a competent team come up with a report, interview people, weight them, and make sure that these are the qualified people, and then the minister would would disregard that process and they go and report to cabinet. So there might be improvement there. But, you know, in law, there's always compromise because ministers also feel that they should not completely be disempowered because they are still accountable. But we believe that if our leaders are ethical and they are acting in the best interest of the company, that incident should only come where the minister would say, I think there is no board diversity here. I think there is no independence. So maybe committees, can you relook at this process and not to say who is my favorite, who's not my favorite. So
I think what I hear you say and what I heard Mr. Ntelamo talk about when he mentioned that is there must certainly be a mechanism that also holds the minister accountable in the end, because you can't just make a blanket arbitrary decision. So in law, every decision, and especially when it's an administrative decision, should be reasonable and it must be based on a reason. So that aspect of a mechanism that doesn't give him unfettered discretion without holding him accountable should not be there. So I think that is obviously be something that should be looked at when we are looking at the regulations. The other thing that I quickly wanted to touch on is, as you are speaking, there are so many things that we can actually discuss. I know the time issue is there, but in the absence of agreements, and I know there's sometimes, and actually twofold question. The one is that in the absence of an agreement, the performance and the governance agreements of the board and the individual directors and the ISBP, and never mind the ISBP, but just the agreements. In the absence of that, how do we get to a place that we can enforce the removal of directors without that, if that is the basis of removal? That's the one aspect. And the other side of that coin is, does the ministry have capacity to actually enforce the act from their side? Because it's twofold, isn't it? It's the public enterprises have to respond, but the ministry also has to respond. And does the ministry have the capacity to do this? I'm asking because I have things in the back of my head that warrant that question.
Yeah, of course, there are so many issues, but look, if you look at PEGA, okay, so in most of the establishing act, there is a section that talks about the removal of board. Okay, you don't have to just have the performance agreement and the governance agreement, and maybe you can also come to it, and if it's there, they will not be held accountable. There are so many areas where a board can be held accountable or can be removed. You know, so of course those are good instruments, because to say that you have not complied with your governance agreement, you have not complied with your performance agreement, you either have not signed it or you have signed it but you have not complied with it in terms of what you committed yourself there. But there is common law principle that, for example, if in normal corporate governance, the board have fiduciary duties. For example, that the board should not be conflicted. A board member should not be conflicted. A board member should always act at the interest of the company, not at their own interest. A board member should have confidentiality and declare. So those fiduciary duties, whether you have a governance agreement or don't have a governance agreement, the board need to comply to at all times. If board members come to board meetings, like I always talk to board about due diligence and care, they read the pack. And of course, some management are very clever. They will bring a book like this because they know, for example, black people don't like to read. You know, they hide the information there. You don't read the information, you take a decision. You'll be held accountable because you did not apply your due care and diligence. So there are many ways we can use to remove a board. If there are information that are available that board is not acting in the best interest of the organization and they have failed in their duty to observe fiduciary duties. So in terms of whether we have the capacity, definitely not. You know, remember that PEGA is a very new law. It came into operation on the 19th of December 2019. Then COVID hit in 2020. And then there has been a transition arrangement now. We were a ministry, now we are merged with the Ministry of Finance. So at the moment, we are actually busy. So we have, for example, a pool of consultants that we always tap into their diverse skills and knowledge, but we are actually busy establishing a proper institutional framework to manage public enterprises. So we are busy restructuring the Department of Public Enterprises together with the ministry so that we can find appropriate skills and competencies. The team that is there is doing extremely very well, but it is very small in number, and managing 81 public enterprises is not a joke. So and you need, for example, people that have skills in the sectors, in different sectors. So at the moment, we are trying our level best, but I don't think we are yet there. I think we are maybe having a capacity of 20%, which is required to manage the 80% of the process. So I think we understand that we do need more team to come in, more skills to come in to strengthen and boost the team, because public enterprises are complex animals to manage. And then, of course, you also need to, we are also looking at, of course, with also feedbacks from the people like him and others. So we are also putting together a process on, for example, how to harmonize PEGA with other establishing acts. So how to develop an implementation plan for PEGA, because there's a lot of non-compliance, and also other people are saying they don't understand the law. So we are also looking at doing awareness training, marketing and development program for public enterprises and also for the public, so that the public understand what is their role because they come into face to face with these public enterprises. What does the law say? What does the law protect the public in terms of how they deal with the public enterprises? So we want to run out a campaign to explain this law, both to the public enterprises themselves and also to the public.
Mr. Ntelamo, that was a mouthful and raised a lot of issues. Yes. PEGA and the department, and I think now it's more a department of public enterprises than it was a ministry in the past. Can you tell me what you think about that change, that transition from a ministry to a department, and even just the transition from there being nothing on that front in terms of even a ministry or a department to now there being from a ministry to a department? Are we regressing back to nothing, or are we improving? What is that? Can we talk about how impactful that transition has been, if at all?
Yeah, from my standpoint of view, I did not take the transition very well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which one? The establishment of the ministry, or the ministry to the department?
Where we have landed.
Right, okay.
My issue is where we have landed.
Yeah.
She described to us the State-Owned Enterprises Governance Act of 2006.
Yeah.
Secretariat Council. Then came an amendment in 2015 to introduce a ministry, a minister, the whole architecture.
Yeah.
And then PEGA came. Shortly after PEGA, then you dissolve this architecture of a ministry into another ministry. Today, she confirms that they are a department.
Right.
Within the ministry. That sounds, unless I have the facts, it sounds to me there's a reduction.
Is there been a denigration?
Yes, in authority, in significance, and so on. I'm afraid a lot has to be done that we do not see that really reduces the intensity and the focus, the strength, the authority, the architecture of a ministry would have commanded previously. Yeah. Yes. So I don't know, but the way I see it, I have some reservations, but I could be proven wrong. The ministry maybe, it's a whole lot of a ministry of finance already, and I'm sure it's already overloaded with so many other things. Finance is quite critical. Now you bring this specter of supervising over 81 other entities, and the staff complement is quite reduced already. So yeah, I have reservations there.
I must agree with you. I also have reservations, especially because, looking from outside in, capacity issues, and also when you serve on public entity boards, you tend to, you can tell the dichotomies, you can tell the issues that are, because not necessarily because of the transition, but perhaps the capacity. I think the transition itself, for me, denigrates the essence of why there was even a Ministry of Public Enterprises in the beginning. And maybe, Mr. Shixwameni, you can tell us how that process went from a whole ministry, which was focused on wanting to take a hybrid system to a centralized system for at least some of the public entities, to becoming just a department that is subsumed under a whole ministry.
Well, first of all, I don't think the institutional framework sometimes matters in terms of how a job can be done effectively or efficiently. Okay. I mean, whether we are a department or a ministry, the interest should be, are we serving the public enterprises better? Okay. Now, the vision... Are we? The vision... I think we are getting the vision of where we were and where we are going is that we want to transition into a centralized model. Okay. So where we have a holding company, and all the commercial public enterprises, they will be under one company. Okay. Now, if you look around the globe, and I've done quite a bit of research on that, most of the public enterprises, because when you talk about public enterprises, we are talking about commercial, because an enterprise must be a business. Most of them are either under treasury or they are under the holding company. So the whole world is moving into the centralized model. Now, the closeness of public enterprises to treasury, especially those are commercial enterprises, for me it's a good move. Yeah, because if you look at public enterprises, or most of them that are, of course, also non-commercial, they are funded by the treasury. The intimate relationship between public enterprises and treasury is of critical. So, but now the where I see it's going is where we will now, if the holding company emerge, because the president announced by 2025, the portfolio of commercial enterprises should be transformed into a holding company. So that for me will be a good move. Then the non-commercial portfolio would have to find another home, because definitely its home is not with the Minister of Finance. In many of other countries, it has to be at institution high, either Prime Minister or President's office and things like that. So we are in a transition process. So we are not saying that this is the last process, but I think the transition and the merger came as a step toward the vision where we are going, in terms of really to make sure that commercial enterprises are centralized. And the reason for centralizing them is because they're going to have a stronger portfolio. If you have one company with a 142 billion balance sheet, that company can do major acquisition. That company can able to bail out the others. Then instead of them coming to the state, they come to their holding companies. That company can play a role in different markets and even create maybe new companies. So it can also able to disinventure faster than maybe when you have segregated them. So I think that is where the future is. And I think let us be hopeful for that future, that this is where the transition of public enterprises are coming in.
It probably is a thought through process, and hopefully it is, because I can hear obviously different mandates, different ministries coming under one holding company. And obviously, you said that it's not the institution that matters or the institutionalization that matters as much as the impact. And hopefully the impact will be greater in the way that we want to establish it, and legally and otherwise we find that that's a more apposite approach to take for public entities. I think there's definitely so much that needs to be done. There is always the question whether PEGA is enough and whether it's adequate in both applicability and enforceability of it to make public enterprises become even more effective and efficient in the way they operate and are impactful in the society that they operate in. So there's that aspect, there's the institutionalization, the capacity, and hopefully the capacity issue was not created because of that move, hopefully. And hopefully the capacity issue can be addressed sooner than later.
Definitely.
Because we will cripple that very solution that we're trying to bring to public entities if we don't take care of what we have right now, and we are trying to transition again into something else whilst there's something else is not working properly in the meantime. There are so many questions that I want to ask, but I want to leave us with, before I leave the thoughts, I actually want to ask that both of you just give me your parting thoughts on how can we really improve public enterprises. And we've spoken about how we can improve PEGA, and we talked about capacity. That's definitely an issue, but how can we actually actively and impactfully improve our public enterprises? What are those things that we need to do? Mr. Ntelamo?
Right. Public enterprises are modeled on companies, privately held, right? That is, companies in your private sector space. When you do a lot of studies in corporate law, you get to understand fairly quickly that the controlling mind of the company is the board of directors. There is what they call the Delaware Code in the United States of America. It's very famed for corporate governance. Some geographies have lifted some portions from there, especially with respect to the powers that a board has. That the business affairs of a company will be run under the authority and direction of a board of directors. So if we have to improve public enterprises, those on whom or unto whom more powers have been devolved, we expect a lot from these people. They are the controlling minds of the public enterprises. Well, overnight, we may not just expect them to fly. I think the important question, as you see in many court judgments today, they are saying, if shareholders appoint foolish directors, that is their problem. We have moved from an era in re-equitable insurance. You would remember that old case, an Australian or UK case, where it did not matter in the past how educated, how skilled, how knowledgeable, how experienced a director was. We have left that. Today, we want directors who understand the business of the institution to which they've been appointed, and to bring their part there. She talked about diversity. Just in summarizing, there's an article on marrying diversity and independence in the boardroom. Yeah. How Far Have You Come, Baby, by Erica Bicha-Monas. Diversity and independence really have moved from your gender and to executive, non-executive. It's now in the mind. How do you think? Are you independent? We need to discourage on boards groupthink. A chairperson walks in with some agenda that he picked from outside, and he wants to infiltrate that agenda with everybody else. No, we should differ on the board. We should have divergent views. We can't always think the same. I bring my engineering expertise, you bring your business. When we get to an agreement, it's one that has been reasoned properly. So let's look at our appointments. On the boards, on CEOs. Can we go for merit? Let's be transparent. We should also be audited if we like. How did you appoint X and why? It should be clear for everybody. If I qualify, if I'm good, I'm good. I don't have to be appointed behind back doors. It should be in the open. Thank you.
I think that's a good point.
Thank you.
Ms. Shixwameni, very briefly.
I think we will have probably more time to talk about other issues, like one of them, which is board appointment. I think that is one of the things. They always say the road starts from the head. So we have paid a lot of attention, and me and our team and the minister and the executive directors, we spend a lot of time discussing about how to improve board appointment, because we believe that that is the first step we need to correct right. And we have tried our best for the past few years. We are able to evidently open our books to the public and say, this is how people were appointed. These are the skills they possess. And you find that everybody's obsessed with board appointment. We have now in one of the first in Africa where you can apply online to any board. But Namibians think that they are there to make money. So everybody apply. People don't think that for you to qualify in the board, you need to have some senior experience up to a level where you have 20 years of experience before you can sit on the top of an organization and command. You know?
True.
So everybody think, I can try. But I think that's one of the areas we can speak about it, but I think it's highly important. The other issues that I want to add to him is really the issue around consequence management, and that is the reason why my vision is to at least have some of the public enterprises even listed. Because in a listed company, you don't give excuses why your financial statement is late for less than a day. You get delisted. That is consequence management. So we need, I think, to develop a governance architecture, a formidable governance architecture where all of us, including the Institute of Corporate Governance, other experts come in and says, if we want to get it right with public enterprises in Namibia, because this is not a government issue or own issue, it's a Namibian issue. So, and maybe we have NAMCode. We have tried to standardize and integrate NAMCode into our public enterprises, but we need, I think, to sit down as a sector and as individuals, including the Institute of Corporate Governance, and say, what are the governance, what are the don't, and what are the instruments that we must put in place to ensure that we guard against non-corporate governance, and we hold each other accountable toward that. So probably we need to have a code, and we need to make sure that that code is codified, and we make sure that is maybe there's a legislation, a regulation around those codes, and then we make sure that consequence management take place. So I think that is, for me, the best way to move, because for too long, we have allowed people to take this public entity for granted. We have allowed people to run away with murder by taking public money and be not held accountable. So for me, I just want to invite Namibians to say, public enterprises belong to you. They belong to all Namibians. So let us take interest in these public entities and give us your comments, your recommendations, your ideas, your advice on how we can effectively improve governance, ethical leadership, check out corruption within these public enterprises, and ensure that these companies, because like, for example, I was talking about the other day around the issues around public enterprises, they are the driver for employment creation. If one public entity creates industries around where they are in, just take one public entities and they create industries. You take, for example, the port, and they will create, that port can create 5 to 20 companies, because they is open to public discussions, to opening up to discuss on what are the other instruments that we can use to ensure that these public entities are effectively managed for the future of for the future generation of this country.
I like those closing remarks from both of you, and I really don't want to take away from that, because it was essential in the way you've put it. Leadership that is both ethical and that's both apt and has the acumen to carry out the duty, but also can be held accountable from your perspective. And I like that. Thank you for joining us tonight at Fireplace Conversations. We really had a good discussion, and as it always happens, time runs out, and we look forward to having more discussions around how we can improve the governance of public enterprises, and not just public enterprises, all types of entities. And in the following weeks, we will go into specific topics like shareholder interference in public enterprises, appointment of directors of public enterprises, and many other topical issues that we should be dealing with. Have a good evening, and thank you for being with us. And thank you so much for giving us your time to grace us with your expertise and your views. Thank you. Thank you.